The Mongol Empire, the largest continuous land empire in history. At its peak, the Mongol Empire was spread over China in the east, Eastern Europe in the west, north of the Indian subcontinent in the south, and parts of the Arctic in the north. The success of the Mongol campaigns is due to them being at the right place at the right time, a place where nobody really cared what small tribes did, giving Temujin an opportunity to unify the Mongol peoples with no foreign interference. A time when everybody was fighting their own war, the ones who weren't were too incapable to do so. His incredible military tactics baffled anyone who dared fight him, and made him to be feared by many, changing the course of history forever. But what if this changed? What if in an alternative timeline, Genghis was just defeated in battle during his early rise, causing a major setback to the Mongols and containing them to Northeast Asia? Now, in our timeline, there are many points where the Mongols should have lost, but just didn't. That's where the Khwarazmian Empire comes in. Being established in the same time periods, both empires were quick to take nearby lands and take advantage of weaker neighbors. The Khwarazmians took advantage of a weaker Seljuk state and took its Persian possessions. Following the death of his father, Tekish, Alauddin Muhammad would become the new Shah. He would take over the western Karakhanid Empire in 1213 and then take the western part of the Ghaznavids, including its capital Ghazni, in 1215. Muhammad had a dream of spreading Islam to China, and upon hearing of the sack of Beijing by Genghis Khan, he would send an envoy to confirm this news. Upon his return, this would be proved right. Now, both had established fairly formidable empires, and it is said that Genghis had refrained from going to war with Khwarazmshah. Following the annexation of China, he had tried to open trade with Khwarazm, accepting them as a neighbor and referring to himself as the ruler of the lands of the rising sun, and referring to Muhammad as the ruler of the lands of the setting sun. Alauddin Muhammad, however, saw the opening of trade as a Mongol ploy for invasion. The Khan sent a caravan of Mongol merchants to Khwarazmian, but Inalchuk, the governor of Otrar, seized the goods and executed its members on charges of espionage. The Shah rejected the Khan's demands for Inalchuk to be punished, killing one Mongol envoy and humiliating two others. The Khan saw this as justification for war. Now, there were many mistakes made by Alauddin Muhammad during the war. He had shown himself as highly incompetent during the war. The fortifications in the cities were made out of mud walls, which was probably because these areas had been recently annexed, and the reparation process for these areas had not started yet. Due to this, he had also spread his army out in the garrisons across Central Asia, trying to prevent revolts in these lands. Khwarazmshah also seemed to have a curse of making enemies with literally everyone around, be it the Seljuks, the Abbasids, and now, more recently, the Mongols. But in this timeline, Alauddin Muhammad would either die following the war with the Ghaznavids, and with military support, his son Jalaluddin would become the new Shah, or Muhammad would willingly give the command of the army to Jalaluddin. Now, Khwarazm would need to calm down on its diplomatic stance, better relations with its neighbors such as the Delhi Sultanate, the Anatolian Seljuks, and the Abbasid Caliphate. This should prevent an attack from the south, hence relieving the armies in the south, and it could also provide with more manpower, especially from the Delhi Sultanate, who can provide with Indian war elephants, which by this time were unknown to the Mongols. Trade would be opened with the Mongols, preventing them from getting an early justification for war, because by this time the Mongols were still fighting a war against the Jin dynasty in China, so the Mongols would not like to fight a two-front war. This would also give Khwarazmshah more time to prepare for war. The restoration process would be started in the lands recently annexed, and this would also better the fortifications. Before the war, the army would be consolidated between the Amu and the Sir rivers, with armies of 20 to 30,000 troops protecting the garrison and to relieve any sieges. This preparation could also mean that the Khan would probably catch on eventually. This would cause him to try to end his campaign in China as fast as possible, giving Jalaluddin the perfect opportunity to strike. Khwarazm, just like our timeline, would stay on a defense in this timeline, and Genghis would leave with a small portion of his troops in China and leave with the rest towards Khwarazmshah. Again, similar to what happened in our timeline. Reinforcements from the Delhi Sultanate would arrive and Jalaluddin would spread his troops enough to where they could join together while also protecting and garrisoning the region between Ammo and Sir. This could also lead to a revolt in Persian and Afghanistan, so this could pose a major risk. However, it could be beneficial against the Mongols as those areas wouldn't have troops to defend it. Rather, those troops will be with the main force in Khwarazm and Transoxiana. The Mongols would make their first move by sieging Otrar, just like they did in our timeline, but after a few weeks will be defeated. This is because Jalaluddin and the main army would stay near the capital, while a smaller army will be sent to guard the mountain passes, unlike what they did in our timeline, where they sent a lot bigger of an army towards a Mongol trap, which caused them to be defeated. The Mongols would then try to attack undefended areas, which would slowly reduce their military size. It's hard to estimate the army sizes of both, but this is my scenario, so we can presume that both were equally matched armies with about 200,000 on both sides. Though the Mongols had brought Chinese gunpowder catapults in the sieges, this would be countered by the Delhi Sultanate's war elephants. The Mongols, unaware of how to combat against them, would suffer severe casualties due to it. Eventually, Jalaluddin would be able to forcefully divide the Mongol Empire into smaller groups of four. One of them, led by Genghis' youngest son Tolui, would be defeated at Urgench by the much larger Khwarazmshah army. Following this, another army, led by Genghis' son Ogedai and Chagatai, would be defeated at Otrar. By this time, the war would turn into a war of attrition, one that favors the one with more manpower, and it would seem that Khwarazmshah was winning. In China, the Jin Empire would launch a counter against the very small Mongol army. Fearing a major setback there, Genghis Khan would leave 70,000 troops to crush the threat. Meanwhile, the rest of the Mongol army would regroup and, under the command of Jebe and Jochi, would siege Samarkand. While a similar sized force would try to relieve the city, Jochi would hand the siege completely to Jebe and take another army to Bukhara. At the same time, Urgench would be besieged by Subutai. Khwarazmshah would suffer many losses, but would still defeat a now small army led by Jebe, relieving Samarkand. Jebe would retreat, trying to bait the army into a trap, but would fail. This would mean that only two groups would be left now. Jalaluddin would have confidence in Urgench that it would fall, and would rather rally another large army to relieve Bukhara that had limited fortification. Though Jochi would temporarily take Bukhara, he would be forced to surrender after prolonged siege. That would leave only Subutai, leading an army of about 60,000 troops to fight against the Khwarazmian army of 50,000. The Mongol army's morale would be low, and Subutai would be unable to capture the city and retreat with a small force of 20,000 troops. This would mean that Khwarazm-Shah had now successfully defended against the Mongol army and could now march further into Mongol territory. It is hard to predict what Khwarazm-Shah's plan would be in case of an offensive against the Mongols, as the terrain in the bordering areas is very unfavorable for any attackers. But it does seem that they might have some sort of advantage, seeing that the main Mongol army is actually fighting against the Jin dynasty's threat in China. Now, as for the effects that this would really have on the world, Genghis Khan would be victorious against the Jin, further cementing Mongol presence in China. However, the crushing defeat against Khwarazm-Shah would mean that at least a delay in Mongol expansion into the rest of Asia. As for Khwarazm-Shah, there would be revolts in Persian Afghanistan, which it would need to crush. If it is able to do that, it can focus completely towards the Mongols. Now having good relations with the Caliph and most of its neighbors, it has a good chance at winning in case of another war breaking out. It can now also increase its military capabilities due to it capturing some of the gunpowder catapults used by the Mongols during siege.